It is time to sit back and relax as we listen to these 3 disturbingly true, scary stories. If you are new to my channel, then welcome. The name is DrDark, and I am a scary storyteller. If you end up enjoying the stories along the way, then do make sure to like the video and share your thoughts on the stories down in the comment section below. If you want to listen to more such scary stories, then do subscribe to my channel and turn on all post notifications to always get notified when I upload a new video. With this, it is time to gather around and settle down, as the classes of DrDark are now in session. I have never shared this story except, strangely enough, to my teacher at the time. I was in the first grade at Northside Elementary in DeSoto, Texas. We lived about 3 long blocks down, as my mother liked to call it. I personally feel it was a lot more. My sister and I were brought to school on a regular basis and walked home. My parents decided to divorce right at this time. My dad moved out, and we started seeing him every other weekend. My mom began dating someone else, and I remember she no longer became interested in taking us to school as much. She became very preoccupied with her new relationship, and I remember that she often had me walking to school as well as coming home. Thinking back now, I am not sure why I was late. There might have been a doctor's appointment or something. I remember that it wasn't very late at all. Maybe just an hour or so after school started. My mom pulled up in the car and I got out. I remember hoping that she would wait there to watch me go up the flights of stairs and inside. But she drove right off, to my dismay. And this is when I saw him. A man, pretty normal looking, stepped out of a car looking directly at me. My mom had pulled off and this man was the only person around. He crossed the street quickly at an angle, coming directly towards me. I remember turning and running up the steps. When you are a little girl, these stairs seem much bigger. I remember looking over my shoulder and he literally was running up the stairs after me. And I had that horrible gut reaction and ran as fast as I could. I remember the double doors in front of me and I was panicked, thinking I would not make it. At that young age, I felt the energy coming from this otherwise normal-looking person who looked like a dad. I remember the huge intrinsic feeling of doom and urgency to go through those doors. And I did. And I immediately turned around and saw him, standing on part of the second set of stairs. And he just stood there, looking at me, as I looked at him from inside the building. And then he looked very frustrated and turned, walking away back to his car. I remember telling my teacher about it, maybe a week later. A police detective showed up to interview me about what had happened. This makes me think it may be connected to something that had happened in that area at that time. I don't think I have ever been that afraid in my life, and it was a powerful internal fear. It was like my body told me immediately to run. At the time this happened, I was a 13-year-old female. So this happened 2 years ago and I was fairly naive. I was a major introvert, only friends with a few people in my class. I wanted to be social, but I preferred to be alone and read or write. Classic nerd things. In early November, I got a text on my phone that was from a few classmates, whose phone numbers I had, and around 1 or 2 I couldn't recognize. It was a group chat, asking if we wanted to hang out at night near a park at our school. My parents, being strict and paranoid, would never let me go. Luckily, or what I thought was luck, they were heading out for an overnight trip. They would be back around 4 in the morning. Everything fell into place. Once my parents left around 8-ish, I ran out the door and made my way to the park. The one thing I made sure to do was lock the doors. My parents were paranoid after all, and it was the biggest thing that they engraved into me. Once I arrived at the park, I noticed a creepy figure near the edge of the woods. No one else seemed to notice it, and I already had enough reputation as a weirdo who was true crime obsessed, so I didn't mention it. The night drew on and on. I was having the time of my life, ignoring the gut feeling I had telling me to run. Every so often I would look over my shoulder and the man would still be standing there. Around 9:45, 4 out of the 10 people there had to leave due to their curfew. It was getting cold and was nearly pitch black, with a few street lights every so often. The rest of us decided to go as well, since it felt more eerie and quiet. The place we were hanging out at was a field that was fenced in, and a few exits and entrances. A large wide field with a small park in the back, and a giant middle school behind us. The front of the field faced the empty road, and the right and left sides were surrounded by forest. All of the people left were getting picked up by cars, meaning that they went the opposite way of the road, since that's where the parking lot was. The man stood by the right forest road exit that I needed to take to get home. I walked away from my group and tried to steady my heavy breathing. I didn't want to be paranoid, but all the true crime I listened to was catching up to me. The man was probably early 40s, late 30s. Dark hair with a beard. He was probably around 5'9", but at the time it seemed like 6 feet. He stood about 10 feet from the exit I had to take, so when I got close enough to it, I ran for about 30 feet through the exit and through the woods. Once I felt safe enough, I started just to quickly walk through the woods, or at least get to the road. I heard a snap and a crunch from behind me. I stopped walking for a second and quickly checked over my shoulder. Around 15 feet behind me stood the very same man. He was walking slowly behind me, almost as if he was trying not to be suspicious, but it only made my fears worse. I turned around and walked so quickly, I was basically jogging. I lived about 10 minutes away from the park we had hung out at, and I wasn't athletic enough to run home. After around 7 minutes of walking fast, I was in my neighborhood. I knew that I could run to my house if I had to, so I checked to see if he was still trailing behind me. To my horror, he was only 5 feet away, so I just ran. I ran faster than I've ever ran. I could hear his footsteps behind me thumping across the concrete as he ran too. I dove down an alleyway I knew well and tried to lose him in a park, making my way home longer. I could hear his heavy breath followed by his footsteps as he tried to keep up. I cut through houses, backyards and front yards. I finally made it to my house and flew up the steps. I looked behind me and he had just arrived at the bottom of my stairs. I unlocked the door and bust through it, shoving it closed behind me, and heard him hit the door with his whole body. I ran around the house and locked all the windows, turned off the lights and hid in my bedroom with a kitchen knife, just in case he got in. He didn't, luckily. If this was a better word, that's where my story would end, but it doesn't. After a few months, I haven't really told anyone what's happened since. I don't want to get in trouble with my parents for sneaking out or anything. I didn't go out with anyone or any group anymore, and my loner status returned. I began to write horror stories as a coping mechanism and never went out past 7 p.m. It was around February when a classmate of mine was sharing a story of some random man following her home on the bus. She described him almost the exact same as the man who had chased me home. Another girl mentioned that he sounded like the guy who stood outside the school and tried to follow her home. I didn't join in, but everyone agreed that he was just a weird guy. He was kind of forgotten, and eventually I moved on too. Around May, I was getting ready to walk to school when my mom pulled me aside and showed me a picture of a man. The guy who stalked me, actually. She told me that he had been arrested 2 weeks ago for assaulting a child and had escaped last night. She told me to keep an eye out for him and to call the cops if I saw him. I was shaking the whole time I walked to school. It haunts me to know that if he had caught me, I would most likely be in her position or even dead. So, creepy nighttime stalker who liked to hunt down young girls and assault them. Let's not meet again. One sunny warm day about a year and a half ago, I was hanging out at this little park. The park was located in the center of one of our small historic townships, right on the main street. The park had a small playground with a swing set and a mini jungle gym with a slide. There were also public restrooms and an old brick jailhouse for like 2 people from back in the day. Plus, a large gazebo with a couple of metal benches. The gazebo is located right in the center of the park, which is where I was sitting while embroidering. Next to the park, separated by a small road that led to the park's parking lot, there was a historic 2-story building. Outside the back of the building, a massive deconstruction and cleanup project was underway. I could see clearly what was going on from my position on the gazebo steps where I was sitting. On the first day of the cleanup process, I noticed that the only dude left working there for the day seemed to keep staring over at me. At that time though, I really didn't think much of it. However, the next day I also noticed the same dude seeming to stare over at me once in a while. As he was finishing up for the day, a friend that I was talking to at the gazebo decided to head over and ask the dude what was going on over there. As a result, the dude eventually worked his way over to the gazebo with my friend. They talked for a little while, but the dude lingered behind with me even after my friend had to leave. Our conversation was pretty basic, just idle chit-chat. You know, polite but distant sort of stuff. Like stuff about the recent weather, nothing deep. As we were talking, he noticed that I smoked when I opened up my sewing box. Politely apologized. He asked if I could smoke a little with him, so I didn't have to get up and walk to his car to grab some of his. I knew he was just tired after a long day's worth of physical labor, so I understood. But unfortunately, I told him I was out myself at that moment. So he suggested that we both walk back to his car to smoke. Hesitantly, I decided to walk to his car with him. We were out in broad daylight in public, after all. But when we got to his car, he had a quick glance inside. He realized that he had forgotten his smoke wherever he was staying. As he turned back to me from his car though, I noticed him suddenly looking around, as though maybe looking out for someone. "Is there something wrong?" I questioned. He then told me a rather lengthy story about how he was being stalked by a gang. He said that it has been about a couple of years at this point. That made me a little nervous, as his whole demeanor had seemed to change since telling me that story. So, trying to change the subject, he suggested that we go where he was staying to smoke. He said it was only like 5 minutes away from the park. I declined politely, making up a lie about me having a ride coming for me at any time. But he tried pressing me more about it, emphasizing that it was practically just down the street. He said it was kind of lonely there, and it would be nice to have some company over. I once again politely refused his invitation, which seemed to frustrate him a little. As he was still trying to talk me into it, I noticed that he had been leaning against his car with one arm on it, as he was standing in front of me. I had my back to the car, but it didn't really start to bother me until he put his other hand on the other side of me, sort of trapping me there. I quickly ducked under his arm and stood more freely, a few inches over. Right after I moved away slightly, he got into the door panel of his open car door and pulled out a large hunting knife. He must have understood the shocked look on my face, because he sort of laughed a little and explained that it was for any potential gang members that may have been watching at that time. I didn't quite know how to respond to that. At that moment, I started to think about how I did have a good friend who lived just on the other side of the park in a small apartment building. But I knew the dude would have easily watched me walk over there and could have potentially waited for me to walk back out to leave. So I started to make an excuse that I should be heading on right then, and he should go home and relax and smoke, and that I was sorry I couldn't go with him. I really just didn't want to piss him off right then, but just as I was about to open my mouth to finish making my polite excuse, he stepped over in front of me and blocked me with his arms again. "Come on," he pleaded with me. "Just come with me back to my place for a bit and we can hang out and smoke." He reiterated once again that it was only like a 5 minutes drive. At that point though, I was done making excuses to this dude. I had already made it crystal clear that I was not going anywhere with him. It was then that he pulled the knife from his pocket. Through gritted teeth, trying to mask his frustration, he said, "Look, I'm just a little lonely is all." He leaned in so close to my face that I could clearly see his yellowing, crooked teeth barely inches away. "I won't be keeping you long," he hissed in my face. At that point, I really started panicking internally. I froze, not knowing what to say. But then, thank all sorts of goodness for another friend of mine who suddenly appeared, calling my name out as he approached us. "What's up?" he asked, walking up to us at the car. That seemed to do the trick, as the dude put his arms down and turned to face my friend. Upon releasing me from his dominance, the dude started to politely introduce himself to my friend. His whole demeanor had suddenly went back to normal. So as politely as I could manage, I started a casual conversation with my friend, and we began to slowly walk away from that creepy dude together. We left that scary situation behind. I never did see that dude again, thankfully. But I did avoid going back to that park for at least a few weeks after that incident. So, creepy, encroaching construction dude who was being gang-stalked and tried taking me out of public view for whatever scary reason. Let's not meet ever again. Please. Thank you for tuning in to the classes of Dr. Dark. If you haven't done this already, then do give this video a like and share your thoughts in the comment section below if you enjoyed the stories along the way. Also, do not forget to subscribe to my channel and turn on all post notifications to always get notified when I upload a new video. Follow me on social media, and in the event that you share this video with your friends, do tag me as well. Lastly, if you enjoyed my style of story narration and want your own scary stories to be narrated by me, then do send your stories to me via email, or you can submit them on my subreddit. You will find the details to everything in the video description below. With this, until next time, class dismissed.